Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining Metalogic's Quick Takes session. We're just waiting for a few more people to join. We'll start in about 1 minute. I do see a lot of familiar names in the attendees list. We'll just give it a moment to let a few more people join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, great. Looks like we have quite a few people on here, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I will go ahead and begin showing my screen. Thank you, everybody, in advance for joining the Metalogic's Quick Take session using a friendly URL for ControlPoint. My name is Paul McNally. I'm a Senior Support Rep for ControlPoint. I'm actually completely sure I've worked with a bunch of you in the past directly. And today we're actually going to talk about basically just using a non-standard URL for ControlPoint. Obviously, the default is going to be machine name :1818. That's the port that we install on. But in a lot of cases, for security or visibility reasons, people just want to use a different URL, something friendly or something a little bit more accessible. So today we're actually going to talk not only about the changes that you have to make within SharePoint to support that, but the changes that you have to make in ControlPoint. There are a couple of separate special considerations that you have to make specifically to allow our scheduled jobs and our pop-up windows and things like that to appear correctly. We'll also talk about a couple of advanced configuration concerns, although we really won't go too deeply into them because for the most part they tend to be specific to an individual environment. The two that pop up most often are considerations for a load balancer and considerations for using an SSL web application. We'll actually talk more about using SSL on our July 30th Quick Take, which will be hosted by one of our other support representatives, Mr. Dave Barnett. So I've actually set up an environment on my end using the machine name where we'll be able to actually go through the process of configuring it for a friendly URL. Let me go ahead and show my screen there. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure we can pop that over to the new window. Just waiting to confirm that. I do also have on with me here Mr. John Singleton, who's our team lead for ControlPoint support. He's going to be answering some of your questions. You should have a question dialog box at the bottom of your GoToWebinar box here. You can just ask any questions, and we'll try to answer them by text or actually answer them out loud over the meeting after we finish this demonstration. Okay, good. Let me know if this is a little small for you. Our internal test environments are a little lower resolution than our demo machines, and just wanted to make sure we could use this and make changes to it without impacting any other users. So this is actually my test machine. If you take a look at it, the URL for it for ControlPoint is McNallyCP :1818. That's just the standard machine name :1818 that you see when you first load up ControlPoint. For whatever reason, and obviously there are a lot of business reasons for this, I don't want my end users to see that. I actually want them to see just ControlPoint. Just be able to type ControlPoint in their URL and be able to actually access the ControlPoint configuration site or access the ControlPoint application with that suffix to the URL. So there are a few changes that we have to make. Some of those are just changes to the web app itself, and some of those are changes to ControlPoint, to the application. We'll start by making our changes to the web app, and actually we can do these right through SharePoint Central Administration. We'll actually have to change the alternate access mappings for the web application that ControlPoint sits on. So all I have to do is go over to alternate access mappings. I'll change my mapping collection to point back to the ControlPoint web application, one called Exceller in this version. It may be called ControlPoint depending on which version you installed and what upgrade path you went through. And right now, I just have the one alternate access mapping, that default URL :1818. So what I'm going to want to do is actually edit the public URL for the web app and point that back to our friendly name. We'll call it ControlPoint. I'll go ahead and save this so that the public URL for that default zone is ControlPoint. I'm actually going to add an internal URL that does point back to the original name. This isn't a requirement, but it can make things a little bit easier when you're upgrading. In the newer versions of the installer, we're a little bit better in our error handling and avoiding not being able to find the web application, not being able to find the IIS site if it's on a non-standard URL. But this might be just kind of a force of habit. I like to put that 1818 URL back in. So having made that change, we have to tell IIS that that control point URL is going to point back to our site. So I'll navigate over to IIS, navigate to my sites, and here we have the Exceller site, and we'll edit our bindings. We still have that standard 1818 port binding. I'm going to keep that in place for the same reason that we talked about with the 1818 alternate access mapping. It's really not a requirement anymore, but I'm a nervous guy, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave that there. But I'm going to add on port 80, the HTTP standard, or port 443 if it's an SSL alternate access mapping, control point. Nice and simple. So I've hit OK here. I can close out of my binding. And at a really, really basic level, that's all we need to be able to hit the web application. Obviously, there are a ton of factors depending on the configuration of your farm. You may have to make that binding change on each machine running the web application service. But my test machine is a basic single server farm, and we're really just covering the basics of how to get that set up for that URL. So I'm going to go ahead and access the URL that I created, ControlPoint. And we'll give it a second to spin up. And here I have the ControlPoint configuration site, just like I had it before through that 1818 URL. So we can hit the SharePoint site now, but if we just keep the configuration like this, we'll have some other problems with the ControlPoint application itself. We'll have issues with scheduled jobs, with the overnight discovery process, and this ControlPoint URL won't be the only visible URL. End users will still be able to see that original 1818 binding. So there are a few changes that we have to make to support that friendly URL within the application itself. So if I go to my ControlPoint settings list here, and anyone that's ever done anything with our support team knows this is where we have all of our parameters, all of our settings. And we'll give it a moment to load, and you can see that everything here is categorized. The parameter that we're looking for specifically is going to be under the miscellaneous and custom category. It's called inbound control point URL. The default is machine name 1818. That's machine name with that identifier there, not the actual machine name. I've added that. But we're going to actually edit this to point back to control point. This inbound control point URL parameter is actually used for a lot of things, but the most important is that any calls we make to our services, like our scheduling or navigation services, are made with kind of this prefix in mind, and then you add all of the information for the service. So if for any reason that's inaccessible, like the AAM isn't there or anything like that, or you're actually going to find that those jobs will fail. You'll see event viewer errors around the discovery process or around the scheduled job review process. Your jobs won't process, they won't be distributed. So we really do need to change this back to control point. Simple. So now that we have that, there's one further step. Using the control point application, obviously, you don't just access it by typing control point, because that takes us back to the control point configuration site. You actually add the _layouts/Exceller. But in this case, we actually want to get to a specific page. Typing that goes to the xcmain.aspx page, which is sort of the home splash page for control point where I get my hierarchy and I can run my reports from. But we have to go to a specific configuration page, which I've already used before, which is this xcfarmedit.aspx page. This actually pulls directly from our xcadmin service database, from a farm table on that database, and returns the URL of this farm and any other farms that are connected on the same database. In my environment, I just have the one control point farm running on the one xcadmin database, but you may have a multi-farm setup with multiple farm GUIDs listed here. I can edit this, which will actually edit it directly on the xcadmin database, and I'm going to change the farm URL. So it points back to control point, and I'll change the farm name to, let's just call it production. You can keep track of production versus non-prod or any kind of nickname you want to put there. That's not really used anywhere, but it's good to have an identifier that we can keep track of. So I'll go ahead and update this, We always want to keep the GUID the same, and we can't change it without going back through SQL directly anyway. And then what I'm going to do, just let all these changes take effect and resolve any issues that might still exist. I'm going to recycle the Acceler application pool. For the most part, when you change parameters, we're starting to remove the requirement to recycle it because we know it can be a little difficult to do that, especially during business hours. But in this case, I'm going ahead and recycling that anyway. So now that I've made those changes, I've changed the alternate access mapping for ControlPoint. I've changed the binding so I can hit the SharePoint site directly. And I've also made those changes to the parameters. Let's go ahead and try to hit ControlPoint using that friendly URL. And we'll give it a moment to load because we've just recycled the application pool. And you see that familiar spinning ball, and the ControlPoint application will load up behind it. So here we see ControlPoint's the URL that we're accessing this through. Instead of seeing the actual machine name in the top drop-down box, we see production, which was the nickname that I put in on the XC Farm Edit page. And anything that I do now is still going to use that ControlPoint URL. So let's say I wanted to perform a ControlPoint action like copying a site. And I went over here and I went to copy site. Obviously, a key part of this is selecting our destination location. And if you look here, the farm is the production farm with the ControlPoint URL that we defined on that XC Farm Edit page. So this way, if I select a destination URL, the resulting pop-up window is going to use that friendly ControlPoint URL. That's part of the change that we made on the XC Farm Edit.aspx page. We told it this ControlPoint farm exists at this URL. Use this URL and not the default 1818 URL to try to access any kind of pages that result from a pop-up window or any kind of call made. This xcbrowse.aspx page is just this destination farm tree. But if we had removed the alternate access mapping for the 1818 site or removed the IIS binding, we wouldn't be able to hit the original 1818 site on this pop-up window, and we'd see an error even if our alternate access mapping was still pointing back to the original ControlPoint URL. So basically, I know that there are a lot of other situations where just the basic default settings might not apply. If I have an environment that has 5 or 10 servers, I have to make the IIS binding change in all those servers. If I want to access the ControlPoint application through an SSL URL, there are other considerations that you have to make, not just an SSL certificate in the process of getting the web application accessible using SSL, but a couple of changes that have to be made within ControlPoint as well. But it's not overall a complicated process. It's just making sure that you make the changes in each location because there are different parts of the ControlPoint application that basically look at different URLs. So those pop-up windows look at the XC Farm Edit page, the services like the scheduling service and the SharePoint timer jobs look at that inbound ControlPoint URL. So it's important that we make sure we make the change in each location because if we don't, we could be making calls back to the wrong URL that will create some issues within ControlPoint. So just to confirm that everything is working fine, I'm going to go ahead and I'll just run a basic report. We'll call it just an activity by user report, and I can tell you that I'm not going to have much activity on this environment because I'm the only one that uses it. So let's go ahead and run now, though. So here I've finished my report. It's rendered. I have 169 page views total over that month period. After you make these changes, I'd actually recommend trying to run a couple of small reports just to make sure that everything's stuck and that you can still run the reports and get the data that you'd expect. It's just a validation step. making sure that we still have the information even under the new friendly URL. I know that there were some questions. Where can I find this in the guide? If we navigate over to Metalogics.com and you navigate down to our product downloads and resources once it loads up on your screen, you may have to enter your license key at this step to get access to these downloads. If you don't have your license key, we can always help you. Our support team's always available. The phone number you see here, 202-609-9100. But I'm going to go over to my ControlPoint documentation. Let's take a look at the configuration troubleshooting guide. I clicked through that a little bit fast, but it was about halfway down on the screen there. That's a big guide, 217 pages, but we'll go grab the specific page that has the information that we need here. So page, I believe it was 15 that I clicked through to, or excuse me, 14. Page 14 has information about modifying the control point settings, the changes that we need to make for the inbound control point URL parameter. The guide itself assumes that you've already made the changes to the ControlPoint web application. As you can see right here, if you set up a host header for the web application that hosts the site collection, you use the same procedure. Those are the first two steps that we ran through with the IIS binding and the alternate access mapping and potentially any other changes you have to make from an SSL or load balancing perspective. But once you've made those changes, these are the steps that you have to take through ControlPoint. And they're detailed in that guide, and that's the ControlPoint Configuration and Troubleshooting Guide on page 14. So I believe that covers the process, and the quick take is supposed to be just a quick discussion about a ControlPoint topic, but the nice thing is that we have some extra time here that we can address any questions about this or any problems that you've seen on your end. And so we have that question and answer box kind of towards the bottom of your screen there. If you have questions about anything that I've covered right here or you want me to elaborate a little bit further, shoot away. I'll give you guys a second to write out any questions that you have. So it actually looks like we don't have any further questions listed there, which is understandable. This isn't the most complicated process. Oh, we do have a question there. Do you recommend doing anything to make the navigation to the underscore layouts Exceller pages any easier? Now that's actually a fair question, because obviously if I hit this through ControlPoint, I don't get immediate access to the ControlPoint application. There's a lot that you obviously could do. You could create a link directly on that page to point back to the underscore layouts / Exceller page after you've made that AAM change. The shortcut back to the ControlPoint application, if I go down here, this will point directly to the underscore layouts / Exceller page. But that's pretty much the changes that I'd recommend, either using a shortcut, an IE shortcut, or setting a link up directly on that configuration site page, either in the quick launch bar or in the actual blank site page here that points back to the URL. So with that said, though, we are definitely interested in getting all of your feedback about what kind of topics you want to see covered by these quick takes and what things that you think would be helpful. I know that I mentioned that on July 30th we'd be hosting a webinar on some special considerations that have to be taken for SSL. But we're definitely always willing to take feedback, get information. These quick takes, trust me, they're definitely helpful, but they sometimes make our jobs easier too. That helps us get this information to you in an easy package. So anything that you've seen, any pain points that you've seen, we're always open to getting those suggestions back from you. So I believe that this covers it for our quick take here. We've recorded this session, and the session will be available on our knowledge base on Metalogics.com. Someone just actually mentioned best practices for large site collections, or really using ControlPoint effectively in a large farm. That's been something that we've worked with a lot of larger companies on that special considerations you have to take, how to improve the performance of the control point process, I think that's actually a very good idea for a future quick take. So that's actually something, we'll go ahead and take that into consideration when we're figuring out what the next few topics will be. We actually have a document on our site, might be relevant specifically. Whoops, let me go back to Metalogics.com. I know I'm clicking through it a little bit quickly, but we have a document on our usage and reference guide sections for ControlPoint called Using ControlPoint Effectively in a Large SharePoint Farm. It's actually recently been rewritten with some more information about changes we've made to support the scalability of ControlPoint. So definitely, in the meantime, worth reading through, looking into, because there are a lot of best practices, small tips and tricks type things to make ControlPoint process more effectively in a larger environment. So that's a good one to take a look through as well. Someone asked how to let us know about any future requests they have for quick takes. You can contact our support team directly through our website or through 202-609-9100, that number for our support team. Like I said, we take any and all feedback. The product is what it is because of what we've received from our customers, the input that we've received from our customers. So definitely open a ticket or contact us directly, letting us know what you'd like to see from the quick takes process. You'll also get some feedback offered. After this is completed, you'll get a message asking you to rate the experience with this, and we'd be more than happy to hear any suggestions that you have. One other thing that's actually John Singleton's a big fan of, he's recommending to me, is we actually have our Metalogics Academy courses that we host pretty regularly. They're hosted by our Director of Product Management, Tamir is our Content Matrix Director of Product Management. Steve Goldberg. They have additional information about policies, reporting, copy, move, really just an overview of ControlPoint's capabilities. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more of a dive in, that's my recommendation. You'll see here as well, here are the sessions that we're going to be doing for our quick takes moving forward. They're obviously not just ControlPoint. We have our archive, backup, content matrix tools as well. We'll have short sessions on. But you can navigate to this page, and you can see any upcoming sessions, and you'll also get notified by email about sessions that are coming up as well. So I believe that does it for our current quick take. Like I mentioned, this will be posted onto our knowledge base for you to view on demand, or if anybody missed it, to view on demand. And we also will have quick takes in the future, taking your feedback into account. The next one is going to be special considerations when configuring ControlPoint with SSL on July 30th. So I want to thank everybody for joining here, and as I said before, please feel free to contact us with any feedback, questions you have, issues you've been running into, and our support team would be happy to help you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.